Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to a environmental review training for our community development block grant program and projects. We are going to specifically focus on historical preservation law and authority today. We can take generic questions about environmental review, but we really want to focus on historic. Why? We have to have all of our projects reviewed, and Katrina is going to explain that shortly. But we have to have everybody go through a review no matter what type of project it is. That has gone smoothly in the past, and we are starting to have some issues of late. So we just wanted to get everybody on the same page, so we put this together. Please ask questions along the way. Raise your hand, come off mute, however you'd like to. We'd be happy to address those as we go. This will be recorded and put onto the website for the future. I'm not encouraging you guys to sign off now, but you can go back and look at it if you need to. Okay, and with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Katrina Ringler. She is the Deputy State Historic Preservation Office for our Historic Preservation Office down on 6th Street. And she is going to talk a little bit about that. So I will let her take it from here and ask questions as you need. Katrina?
All right, thank you so much. Perfect, thank you. Yeah. As I was introduced, you heard that I'm the Deputy Director of the State Historic Preservation Office. Every state and territory in the country has a historic preservation office, and each one is a little bit different in where it's located within the state structure of the state government. But under federal regulations, our main task is to implement the National Historic Preservation Act, which includes the National Register of Historic Places, administration of federal grants, and administration of historic tax credits. And one of the things we also do is we consult with federal agencies through a program called Section 106. So on the screen there, you can kind of see on the left, we are under the Kansas Historical Society within the Cultural Resources Division.
Can you click view up there real quick?
Yeah, 8 people in the room.
Okay, view, sorry.
You're all right.
What are we doing? Is
Middle.
it all?
Yeah.
Okay. Is that working?
Yep.
Okay. So we are under the Kansas Historical Society, but we are implementing programs that are under the Department of the Interior and the National Park Service. So Section 106, just to give you a quick overview of what it is, it's triggered by actions of the federal agency. So if there is an action that has the potential to physically affect a cultural resource, which a cultural resource could be a building, an archaeological site, a bridge, a battlefield, a landscape, a sculpture, any of those things, then a review has to be initiated. And for community development block grants, the federal agency, my understanding is Housing and Urban Development. So their passage of funding down to the states and communities triggers the review under Section 106. They require recipients of their funding and subrecipients to carry out all of their responsibilities under federal law. And so that's why you all are sending projects to my office, because of the federal funding trigger there. So I wanted to kind of talk about first the 4 steps of the Section 106 process before we get into how to submit a project and what all we need to review a project at the SHPO. The 4 steps include initiate the project, identify, assess, and then resolve. So at step number 1, you're gathering project details, and that's probably the biggest hurdle that we've been experiencing recently, is just the understanding of what needs to be gathered and submitted to the SHPO. Really, steps 2 and 3 can't start unless we have good information about what is physically being done to the property in question. So with initiating the project, you're looking at, is there a funding trigger, which we know CDBG needs the review. As Tim was saying, all the projects need to be reviewed under the program. And then gathering the project details and then figuring out what is the impact to the cultural property. At step 2, it's really important to determine if the project will actually impact the property, a property that is either listed in the National Register of Historic Places or that would be eligible for listing. And so understanding a little bit about the age of the property is important. We don't need to review projects on buildings that were built in 1995 or 1985, but we do need to review projects on properties built in 1975 because the 50-year range between 45 and 50 years is when properties become eligible for listing potentially. So if you are working on a project on a property that is more than 45 or 50 years old, definitely you want to make sure that you gather that information and have a good idea of when it was built. And that way we have that information. Also, you know that the SHPO office, my office, should be consulted as part of this process. But there is also part of step 2 supposed to be identification of anyone else, any other consulting party that might be interested in consulting. So are there local historical societies? Is the city or county involved? Is there a tribal government that might be interested in the project? Identifying those as part of the consultation process as well. For step 3, that's where we really get to you submitting it to the SHPO and we assess what the project, how the project is going to impact the historic resource. We use the Secretary of the Interior's standards for rehabilitation to review the project details. And we have to have certain things in order to do that review. I'm gonna harp on this a little bit just to make sure we're all on the same page, but we have to have photos of the project, the property. We have to have a description of the work that's being done. And if there's any drawings or any kind of other additional information that illustrate how the property is going to be impacted, those are helpful too. If we see that the work will damage the historic property, then that's where we're going to come back with questions or communication to ask about, is there a way that we can change the project? Technically, the federal agency is supposed to do this step, but we work with a variety of different agencies at the state and federal level that have all different kinds of ways that they submit work. So however it comes to us, we're going to respond. We're going to respond to that review request. If step 3 finds that there's no damage to the historic property from the proposed work, then the project's cleared to proceed and everything can keep going forward with the rest of your requirements that you have for your funding program. If there is an adverse effect to the historic property, then we go to step 4, which is resolve or resolution of that adverse effect. So if we have an adverse effect, we first look to see if there is a way we can avoid that or minimize it. And if there isn't a way to do that and still accomplish the goals of the project, then we go to mitigation. And I'll talk more about what that means in a minute. The link there at the bottom of this slide is the Advisory Council for Historic Preservation. They are a federal agency that helps other federal agencies navigate the Section 106 program. And they have a lot of good information on their website, including these 4 steps kind of laid out in more detail. So I'm just going to talk through these steps in a little bit more detail here. Admittedly, steps 1 and 2 usually coincide because you don't really want to gather a bunch of information on a property that is not considered old enough to be historic. So again, if it was built in 1995, I don't need a lot of information because this is not going to impact a potential historic property. So we can just move on, clear the project and be done. But if it is going to be on an older property, then you want to look to see if there is going to be any physical impacts to that property and gather the information we're going to need to do the assessment. So photos, drawings, a written scope of work, any information that is going to tell the SHPO the current conditions of the property and what is being physically planned to impact that property. And included in the step 2 for identification, I recommend looking at a couple of different resources so that you can get a sense of what we already know about the property. The Kansas Historic Resources Inventory is a website that my office administers. And you can go there and look up, actually search by the property address, or you can search on an interactive map. And you can look to see if we already have the property listed in the National Register, or if we've already made a determination of eligibility about the property. There could be historic information, there could be historic photos, whatever's in that resource inventory record could be useful to the review. And then the question of if the building is over 50 years old, one great resource for that is the Open Records for Kansas Appraisers, or ORCA website. We go there quite often to look at property records to see. It's not always entirely accurate, but they usually get it within at least a couple of decades. So if it was built in 1910, ORCA might call it 1900, but they're definitely not going to say 1995 if it was built that long ago. So remember, it's not just properties that are listed in the National Register, it's also properties that are eligible for listing that we look at. So these resources should help you kind of get a sense of whether the property that you're working with might be old enough for us to have some consideration of that. And then, as I mentioned earlier, be sure to consider what other groups or entities may wish to consult on the project. If there's other folks in the community that are interested in what's going on, they may have a stake in the conversation. So with step 3, I wanted to kind of get a little bit interactive if we can, if our setup allows it here. We assess the property and we're looking for an adverse effect. And we have to have enough information to be able to figure out what the existing condition is and what you're doing to the property to change it. So we assess whether the work is going to adversely affect the property by using those standards I mentioned. We have to have photos of all of the areas where work is taking place. We can't do a full review without that. We also need to have some sort of clear description and or drawings of the proposed work. It doesn't really matter to us what form they come in. They could be actual architect drawn plans, or they could be sketches. They could be photos that have been marked on. However you can convey the information to us, or the property owner can convey the information, is fine, as long as we can clearly understand what is happening in the space. So if I told you that I'm proposing a new restaurant for the space that's shown on the screen, does anybody have any thoughts about what kind of information I would actually need?
Just come off mute if you have an answer. Don't be shy.
We'll start calling you out. Sir.
See the chat.
Yeah, I don't know. Can you guys see the chat?
Yeah, go up to the top. And hover where it says you are screen sharing.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
No one's said anything.
Okay. Well, I'm going to give you a little bit of hints or something if you guys don't want to speak up. Oh, wait, somebody wants to chat. Drawing scope. Yeah, definitely. But what should the drawing show? Like what would be your questions if I asked you to review this project and said, I'm going to make a restaurant in this space? Tell me if that's going to damage any of the historic materials. And it may be hard. Go ahead.
I'll take a stab at it. Like for instance, I'm looking at the entryway. If they're going to change that, that looks like it might potentially be original. And then also like up on the ceiling, if they're tearing that down, if there's any like a tin ceiling up above there, and just general removal of walls that might have been there originally.
Yeah, definitely. Those are all good things. I have a list here of a couple of things I was gonna, feed you guys some answers, and those are all things that I would definitely look at. This space just, oh, was there anybody else that had a question?
As I say, also when you pull up the carpet, there might be wooden floors underneath that.
Yep, definitely.
Yep.
Definitely. So yeah, I mean, basically, we need to know what's happening with all of the physical features of the building or the space that's being impacted by the project. So what's happening to the ceilings? What's happening to the floors? What's happening to the walls? If this is going to be a restaurant, where's the kitchen going? So you kind of see to the right, there is probably a back room space of this used to be a retail, storefront. So is the kitchen and bathroom and all of those utilities going in that back area? Or are they going somewhere else that we don't understand? Where's the HVAC going, the ductwork? Is it going to impact, like if the storefront has windows, bigger windows, is the ductwork's going to go right in front of them? And then just an idea of what's being kept and what is being taken out. And things like you may not even think about too, if this is going to be a new business, is there going to be new signage on the front of the building? One of the things that Tim asked me to kind of bring up too is that we understand that the way these projects work, the property owner may not always have all of those details up front or early in the process. So if there is only available information for a portion of the project, we can do a partial clearance if that's helpful. If your program doesn't allow you to kind of accept those, then we understand. But if it will get the project moving, we'd be happy to do that. And we also wanted to kind of point out that, if the funding is only for the roof, they're making this into a restaurant, but your funding is only for the roof, then I don't need all the information about the business. I just need information about the roof, and we can just clear that and move on. So just let us know specifically as possible what is being funded and then what impact that's having.
So let me clarify that, Katrina.
Mhm.
So you're saying if our scope of work does not include some portion of the building, and we're not doing work on that portion of the building, you don't want to know about the windows as an example. We're only doing the roof. We're not touching anything else. What's the material on the roof? Are we changing parapets and all those type of things? Okay,
Right.
thank you.
We've run into that a couple of times on other programs where the program submitted to us, hey, we're going to turn this building into a hotel. And so we start asking all these questions and people are getting kind of frustrated because, well, we don't have those details yet. And finally, somebody said, we're just trying to put the roof on the building right now. And we're like, oh, the funding is just for the roof? Then that's all we need to review right now. We don't need to know about all the other stuff that's going to come once the roof gets put on. So similar to the previous one, that was more of a storefront. This is an upper floor, second level of a building. They're going to put in apartments. And so the kind of information we need in this situation is very similar. We have to have photos of the areas, all of the areas where work is taking place. We have to have a clear description of what's happening. And if possible, drawings to show us where new walls are going, bathrooms, kitchens, that kind of thing. Because even though this space is pretty bare bones, there are some character defining features, what we call character defining features like the columns, the wood floors. But, depending on what they're putting on the ceiling, depending on how the walls are going to interact with the windows, those are the kind of things we're looking for. Are there code issues? For example, if you submit the project and say that window on the far wall has to be bricked up. My initial response to that is, whoa, that is going to really change and have an adverse impact on the historic character of the property. But if you come back to me and say, well, but there's a code issue there because of fire, codes or there's an egress issue or something like that. That's the kind of information we need to explain what's happening. One of my coworkers always explains it as show your work. So don't just tell me what the answer is, but show me the work that went into getting to that decision, so that we can understand the full scope of what's happening. Some of the common things that we see in projects that are submitted to us under various programs that are almost always going to be an adverse effect are vinyl windows, number one. You can see in the screenshot there, a house where the original wood window is on the far left and a vinyl replacement window is on the right. I don't care what the window salesman has told you, they do not match and they do not work to replicate historic windows. There are other materials, other windows, replacement windows that can match, but vinyl does not. So those are almost always going to be an adverse effect. Removing historic plaster to reveal brick or masonry, replacing historic features that just don't match, replacing historic features that are not beyond repair, that you can repair, that you can see are repairable, covering up things with HVAC, introducing materials that are not historically compatible, like a lot of the trends with HGTV come into play where people want to put in rusty metal panels as sort of the wall coverings or the ceiling coverings, or they want to use LVT flooring that looks like weathered barnwood. Those are typically not compatible with historic houses and commercial downtown buildings. They might be okay in a warehouse or something that was a little bit more industrial. Blasting masonry with any kind of abrasive materials or repointing masonry with hard mortar. Those are all going to be things that we automatically red flag, say that's going to be an adverse effect.
So you not only want to know that we're going to tuck point the mortar or the bricks, you also want to know how.
How and with what materials. And so, just knowing that if you say you're going to repoint masonry, I'm going to ask that.
Okay.
If you don't have that information available yet, you can feel free to tell us that. We can sometimes do conditional approvals where we say everything looks good, and as long as you are meeting this specification, you can go ahead and proceed. We can do that. And then, as I mentioned before, if we do have an adverse effect, the first thing we're going to do is try to avoid it. So for example, if you have a project where they are proposing vinyl windows, let's say, our response back is going to say, can we use some other kind of window? Or are the original windows repairable? No. Okay, well, can we use a different kind of window? If that is just not possible, can we get a better vinyl window? Maybe that's not possible either. Then we work toward a memorandum of agreement, which lays out a way to mitigate the adverse effect. So all of the consulting parties involved, so if there are any other people or entities involved in the project, all of the consulting parties come together and we draft this memorandum of agreement that lays out the reason for the adverse effect and what will be done to offset that negative impact. It provides a timeline for when the work must be done and who must be doing it. It's not always the applicant that has to do the mitigation. Sometimes it could be other consulting parties. And there's really no set mitigation for an adverse effect. It depends on the significance of the property, the type of property, the size of the impact, and the interest of the community in the historic resource. So this is just an example from Cawker City. They had to demolish their historic tin can water tower as part of a federally funded project. And the mitigation for that obvious adverse effect was that they did an exhibit in their local library, and they actually compiled a bunch of historic information about the water tower and put it in the local library for people to see and look at. So once you've gathered information, you've identified the consulting parties, you're ready to contact the SHPO. Most of you are probably familiar with our online portal. The link is there, review.kansashistory.gov. We did update our URL a few months ago, so if you had KSHS .gov or .org, it still works, but this is our new URL. And so submissions for project review requests for state or federal funding or permitting goes through that portal. I was just going to walk you guys through especially anyone who isn't familiar with the portal, to show you how it works. There is a login page that gets you started. On the right, you'll see a link to create an account if you don't already have one. The first tip I have for you is that if there's multiple people in your office that are going to be submitting review requests to the SHPO, consider using a shared email address so that everyone can see the submissions and there's no issue if someone leaves employment. Let's see. Oh, someone asked a question in the chat. Let me just address that real fast. A window project, do you have a list of what material is acceptable for replacement when those situations arise? Anything except for vinyl. Aluminum, steel, clad windows that are clad with metal, not vinyl. Wood windows are fine. There's fiberglass type windows that generally have a better. The key thing is that if you are replacing a historic window with a new replacement window, it has to match. And that is the dimension, the profile, and all of the measurements. And so we have to see measurements of the existing and measurements of the new to compare them and make sure that they match. Vinyl windows will never match, but a lot of the other materials will. Good question. So going back to my slide here, if you do have multiple people in your office that are going to be logging in and submitting projects, you might consider using an account with a shared email address. That way, everyone who's submitting projects can see all of the projects that have been submitted in your office, and there's no issue if someone leaves employment. Once you open the dashboard, it kind of looks like this. On the left-hand side, you see a link that says create new project. That's where you go to create a new project. And then there are two expandable lists there for your open projects and your closed projects. This is an example, a screenshot of what we use in my office to do things in-house. That's why there's so many projects on there. But you'll see little boxes at the top. That just shows you how many projects you have in each category. And then there are a list of unread messages under that where you can see if we've sent you any messages. In the top right is where you can refresh the page. And you can also access your messages there and then log off if you are done with the dashboard. As you create a new project and you go through the multiple screens that we have, I'm just going to kind of walk through these to give you a couple of hints and tricks to make sure that the system doesn't throw you for a loop. Hint number one is that the system does not like special characters. So if you are putting in any kind of special character like a $sign or an ampersand, it will give you an error message and it doesn't tell you what the error is. It just says error and kicks you out. So only use dashes and underscores for things to like separate. For example, the first entry there, project name, you might put the city dash address dash project, new restaurant or something like that. Just use dashes and underscores though. It's very helpful if you put the city address or the building name in the project name line, because if you don't have the project number later and we need to look it up for some reason, our search capabilities are kind of limited to what is in the project name. On the screen there, you just want to provide a brief description of the work that's planned. And I just want to highlight that that box does not give us enough information to review the project. Unless you're literally just saying like, we're putting up a new sign or something. We expect that there's going to be attachments at the end of the submission page so that we have more explanation. And then just select your project type at the bottom. And you come to the project location screen. There is a selection box at the top left there where you select the county where the project is taking place. And then there are 4 categories there of location information. Most all projects are going to have a street address. In the rare case where you're doing a project out in the middle of a field or something, you can use one of the other 3 to provide location information. But you only have to provide 1. Don't think that you have to fill out all of those categories. We only need 1. And in fact, at the bottom of that screen, it's not shown here, there is a text box where you can just put in the information, especially if it's a project that encompasses like more than 1 county or more than 1 address or something like that. On the project effects page, we're starting to get to the meat of like why you're submitting the project to us. There is a category there at the top that reminds you about the Kansas Historic Resources Inventory. So if you can put the inventory number there, that's great. If you've looked it up on KHRI and have that inventory number, that's perfect. That gives us a quick shortcut to be able to get to it. But if not, this is sort of a reminder that you might want to go look at that link there to look for your property, to see if we have any information on file already, see if it's listed in the National Register, or if we've determined any kind of eligibility about it in the past. Filling out then if you know it's listed in the National Register or not, or if you're unsure. And then we get to the 2 blanks there at the bottom. Does this project involve ground disturbing activities? In other words, are you going to be digging in the dirt as any part of this project? A new sidewalk, a new parking lot, a new building? If so, our archaeologist on staff is going to need to look at the project. And so this indicates to them that they need to look at the project as well as our architectural historian. And gives them a clue as to what kind of work you're doing in the dirt. And then at the bottom is the question there, does the project involve any potential effects to a building, a structure, a landscape, et cetera, that's more than 45 years old? And so if you've got this far, you probably know that already. You could say yes, and then describe to us a little bit more about what you're undertaking for the project. Again, this information, there's a character limit on these. It's pretty big, but not, it's not limitless. So put a summary here and then anticipate attaching additional information. This goes on to the next page is talking about the funding and the oversight. And this gets to the heart of why you're submitting the project to us. This information tells us why you're requesting the review so that we know what kind of language we need to include in our response back to you. Be sure and tell us if this is a project that is involving a federal agency, which again, community development block grant money is ultimately from a federal agency. And so you would put here, yes, this is a federal agency project. The federal agency is HUD, and then the federal program is CDBG. For example, if there's involvement by a state agency, a county, or a city government, then the project may also be triggering the state preservation law, and we can do those reviews simultaneously. So if you know that, let's say the applicant is the city or the county, or it has some sort of permitting that's going to be required, you can go ahead and put that in those bottom blanks and explain to us what that state involvement is. And we'll do the reviews simultaneously. And then similarly, we also do reviews for the Department of Health and Environment through their notice of intent permits. So if you happen to know that those are part of the project, you can include those but if not, it's their responsibility to submit those separately anyway. And then we have a page where we ask for project contacts. Any contact information for yourself or anyone else that's involved in the project can go here. Keep in mind that we only have your email address and your name from your login information, so we don't have your telephone number or any other way to get a hold of you if we have questions. Or we may not have the property owner's contact information if it's not included in the submission. And at this point, you hit submit, and that actually creates the project and gets you to the next screen where you can do an upload of attachments. And unfortunately, with the system we have right now, you can only upload one file at a time. I encourage folks, if you're going to have a lot of photographs, to put those all into a PDF. That way you can just upload the one PDF. But however you want to do that is fine. Just make sure you click choose file, select the document, add document, and then once you're done, hit finish to close out the project. Remember, again, there's no special characters even in the file names of the attachments. It'll give you that weird error message. We have a tutorial that we have kind of put together in-house that has these screenshots on them with little explanations of what goes in each field and tips about things like the special characters. So if you ever need a copy of that or would like us to share that with you, feel free to reach out to me and I can get that to you. So again, just talking through what needs to be uploaded to your request for review to the SHPO. Like we talked about earlier, we have to have photos of all the areas where work's happening. Overall photos are great, detailed photos of things that are going to be replaced, things that need to be repaired, windows that need to be replaced, that kind of thing are going to be critical. And then description of the project, including existing conditions and the proposed new materials, how those are going to be installed, what materials you're using or what techniques you're going to be used are really helpful. Any drawings that are available or cut sheets from manufacturers and websites are great. You know, on this property here, this little church or school, let's say that they want to restore the bell tower to what it looked like in a historic photo. Well, having that historic photo would be really helpful. So include the historic photo. Similarly, if they were going to replace the roof, let's say it had a standing seam metal roof and they wanted to replace it back with asphalt shingles that mimicked the wood shingles that were seen in a photo from 1906. Having that photo from 1906 would be really helpful so that we know what kind of shingles they want to put on. And then also the product information for the new shingles. That way we can see that they do match pretty well. We see what they want to put on. Another just example would be if this project wanted to put an accessible ramp on the back of the building or the side of the building. Having plans or drawings or some sort of sketch that shows what the ramp's going to look like, how it's going to be attached to the building, and then knowing what materials it's going to be made from are all kind of critical information that we're going to need to be able to do the review. So just another couple of things that are common questions we tend to ask additional information about. Solar panels, we're always going to ask if those are going to be visible from the street. And can you, kind of how can you assure us that it's not going to be visible? If it's going to be a new roof on a downtown commercial building like these, we're always going to ask how you're going to attach the roof to the masonry parapet, because we want to avoid having the roofing kind of come up and over the parapet if possible. When wood windows are being replaced, we're always going to ask if they're beyond repair and need to see photos of what kind of condition they're in. And then, as I mentioned earlier, if you're doing replacement windows, we need information to be able to show that the new window matches the old, and that includes dimensions and profiles and measurements. And so then we talked a little bit earlier too about finishes of walls, floors, and ceilings. Not just we're going to replace them, but with what kind of product, And maybe even to the point of saying the size and the color of things like flooring tile. And then if there is a project where you're actually going to be building new walls, where are those being built? How are they going to be attached? Are they going to impact things that are clearly historic in the building, like a pressed metal ceiling, for example? Number one thing that's going to be a red flag too, besides vinyl windows, is painting unpainted brick. That's a big no-no too. So once you've submitted a project, if you log into your dashboard, you will see that the project is under review and it has a little orange, yellowish orange square there. The SHPO receives between 200 and 300 requests a month. And we have 30 days by statute to review each project. We typically get to them sooner if we have the information available, but it's all about having the information. If we have to ask for additional information, the clock starts over when we receive your response. So it's another 30-day review. So having the information as much as possible upfront will speed up the review times and get us through the process faster. If we have questions and we need to ask for additional information, you will see that pop up on your dashboard with a red square. And there should be a message there underneath the project information that says you have a new message. And our staff has communicated to you through the system what kind of questions we have or what information we need. If it's something simple that we just need a photo or we need you to upload something, you can actually on this screen add a document. There at the right middle, you see it says add document. You can upload new information through that project, that screen directly. But if it's something a little bit more involved, then we may have to arrange for a phone call or do some communication by email. Ultimately, once the project is cleared, then you get a green light to proceed. And there will be a message attached there in the center of the project information with the language of the SHPO's comments. It's very formal. It says like the citation of the federal regulation and that, you know, this project is okay to proceed. There's usually language in there that says this does not mean that the project would be approved under state or federal tax credits, because that is a separate process and that the applicant, the property owner, has to apply for separately. And if there is a memorandum of agreement that we've worked through to resolve any adverse effects, that usually is also attached in the project documents, so it's very clearly there for you to see that. Make sure if there is an MOA in place that there's plans in place to comply with that agreement and that there's a clear plan of who's going to do what to proceed with that MOA. All right, guys, that was it. That is all I have. I'm available for questions and or anything that Tim, you wanted to bring up that maybe I missed.
Yeah, let me just do a couple highlight things I wanted to throw in there, and then we can open up any questions that we have. Katrina didn't really get into like the lovely, language that we have of undertaking. She mentioned it a couple times. An undertaking basically is a project that's funded with federal funds, CDBG. All of our projects are an undertaking, right? Section 106 is triggered by an undertaking, not by historic structures. That's the other thing I think that jumped out at me. Can you talk a little bit, Katrina? You didn't really talk much about this on the area of potential effect, the APE. I would think that would be more for like sidewalk projects and stuff like that. Can you elaborate a little bit on what kind of APE are they establishing? Are there parameters they need to have?
Area of potential effect or area of like the project effect APE, it depends on the project. So obviously if you're doing a building, it's the building. But if there's a sidewalk or a park or something like that, it really just depends on the scope of the project. A sidewalk, I would definitely look at, if it's in a downtown area, it would include the buildings, the street. and maybe just, from end to end. Things that get a little bit hairier, we deal with projects that involve like cell towers and wind turbines, and the APA for those are miles square,
Oh.
like acres and acres and acres, right? So it just depends on the type of the project, and how far away the impact could actually extend.
Can you also talk a little bit about the other groups to consult? That was something I hadn't picked up on in my years. Obviously, tribes are there, and I think everybody on this call knows all about the tribes, but what is the expectation? Are you as SHPO checking it? What would that grant administrator do as far as what kind of obligation do they have? Do they just reach out and try to find if there's a local historical society or what, do you have experience with that? Or are there folks that provide those other consultations?
I think, and again, it's, it's on a case by case basis. I mean, I think most of the projects that you guys are involved with, there's going to be a lot of community support. There's, the property owner is on board. Other people in the community think it's a great idea to move forward. But on the rare occasions when that's not the case, you don't want to, not give people the ability to have their say. And that's part of the consultation process. So, having some kind of reach out to just, see if there's a local historical site. Is there any kind of preservation group or downtown, design review committee or something like that? It's not a bad idea. The most recent example I can think of, it was a KDOT project rather than CDBG, but it was involving the replacement of a brick street in the downtown. And there were locals who were very concerned about that. And to the point that they formed a committee and were very vocal in the consultation process. And it all worked out. There's obviously transportation requirements that said they have to replace the street, or it was a highway that went through a downtown. But we were able to do some mitigation so that the bricks were saved for another purpose. And some of the features were saved on the sides and the parking areas. And so that's really the point of Section 106, is to come to an agreement where everybody kind of is at least given an opportunity to say their piece.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Those are my questions. She answered all the other ones already in her presentation. So anybody want to come off mute or anything? Because I don't know we can see our chat, but if you have any questions about anything, please ask it now, and certainly can follow up on those things too. I think the moral of the story, at least in the conversations I've had with some of the hiccups that we've had of recent, is going to be, what do we provide to SHPO? And I think Katrina did a good job of, like, we don't need to see necessarily architectural drawings. It could be, I don't want to, it could be on a napkin, if you will. I'm sure they'd rather see it on something a little bit more than that. But the moral of the story is just making sure they understand what's happening there. That will make our review very quick and easy, I think. So
I think a couple of examples of things that we've seen in the past that, we get projects sometimes where we might get a photo of the front of the building and it says, we're going to rehab this building. Or what? How? With what materials? Or it says, we're going to make a beauty salon. Okay, well, what do you need to change with the existing space to make it a beauty salon? Just telling us that it's going to be a beauty salon does not give us nearly the amount of information that we need to be able to review the project. So that's kind of the struggle we have sometimes with submissions, not necessarily from CDBG projects. We review for all different kinds of federal agencies, but that could be a challenge sometimes.
So we have to review everything. What if we have a post-70, a 1990, like you were saying, building that we're renovating?
Mm-hmm.
We need to send it to you. Where's the difference between a full-on review and not a full-on review? Is there something different in the portal that they put into it, or how does it look on their side as far as it being different?
So I would, in those cases, if your program requires you to send it to us, then in that initial upload in the portal where it says, will this project impact a building or whatever over 45 years old? just explain in there that's like, nope, it was built in 1995.
Okay, and that will be your trigger.
And then that'll show us like, oh, we can just.
And then everything
Right,
else after that, all those details probably are not
we
necessary.
don't need all the
Okay.
photos and description, everything at
Okay.
that point, because it's not
It
necessary.
doesn't happen that often, but I
Yeah,
just want
it
to make sure
happens.
we're clear.
Yep.
All right, last chance, folks. Anybody want to come off mute or throw something in the chat? Otherwise, I want to thank Katrina for kind of coming on over here to our building and presenting this for us. Hopefully you found this beneficial. Again, it will be on the website for future edification. Thank you guys for your time. We're going to go ahead and sign off. Let me know if you have any questions after the fact. I can certainly get a hold of Katrina if I need to, so. All right, well, thank you all. Thank you very much. Appreciate you. Have a good day.